The cold morning rain hammered against the windows of the DeLuca mansion with a violence that made the glass shudder in its frames. I moved through the service corridor carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies, my muscles aching from the repetitive motions I'd been performing since 5 a.m. The marble floors gleamed beneath my feet, reflecting the dim light from the ornate chandeliers above. Each crystal drop worth more than I earned in a month. My reflection caught in one of the gilded mirrors lining the hallway. 27 years old, and I looked exhausted, worn down by circumstances that had forced me into this position. Dark circles shadowed my eyes, my black hair pulled back into a severe bun that made my face look thinner than it should. The gray uniform hung loosely on my frame, deliberately chosen 2 sizes too large to hide any curves that might draw unwanted attention. I'd been working for the DeLuca family for 3 months now, keeping my head down, my voice quiet, my presence as invisible as possible. That was the key to survival in a house like this. Don't be noticed. Don't draw attention. Don't make mistakes. The scent of furniture polish mixed with the faint aroma of expensive cigars that seemed to permeate every surface in this place. I could hear voices drifting from the main floor, masculine and rough, speaking in rapid Italian that I'd learned not to try to understand. The less I knew about what happened in this house, the safer I was. Lucia. The sharp voice of Mrs. Benedetti, the head housekeeper, cut through my thoughts. She appeared from around the corner, her severe face set in its usual expression of perpetual disapproval. Mr. DeLuca's study, now. It needs to be cleaned before his meeting at 9. My stomach tightened with anxiety. The study was Marco DeLuca's personal domain, off limits except for specific cleaning appointments. I'd only been in there twice before, both times supervised by Mrs. Benedetti herself. The room contained things that weren't meant to be seen, papers that weren't meant to be read, secrets that could get someone killed for knowing. But Mrs. Benedetti, I started, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought, "Are you questioning me?" Her eyebrows rose dangerously. "No, ma'am. I'll go right away." She thrust a key into my hand, her fingers cold and dry against my palm. "You have exactly 45 minutes. Don't touch anything except what needs cleaning. Don't open any drawers. Don't look at any papers on his desk. Am I understood?" "Yes, ma'am." I climbed the grand staircase, my footsteps silent on the plush carpet runner. The mansion seemed to grow quieter as I ascended, the voices from below fading into an oppressive silence, broken only by the ticking of grandfather clocks and the whisper of my own breathing. The study door was heavy, solid oak with intricate carvings depicting scenes from Roman mythology. I unlocked it with trembling hands, pushing it open to reveal a room that epitomized masculine power. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes in Italian and English. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a single lamp and a closed laptop. I began my work methodically, starting with the bookshelves. Dust the leather spines carefully, one by one. Don't disturb the order. Don't let curiosity make you open any of them. The room smelled of old paper and leather, mixed with the lingering scent of expensive cologne that I'd learned to associate with danger. My mind wandered as I worked, drifting to the real reason I'd taken this job. The real reason I was hiding in plain sight, in the home of one of New York's most dangerous men. My daughters, Sophia and Emma, 6 years old, with their father's dark eyes and my stubborn chin. They were staying with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, in the tiny apartment I rented in Queens. The elderly woman had agreed to watch them during my shifts, accepting the small amount I could pay her because she understood what it meant to be desperate. Their father, Antonio, was in prison. He'd beaten me one too many times, and when I'd finally found the courage to leave, I'd discovered he'd also been involved in something far worse than domestic violence. He'd stolen from the organization he worked for, a rival crime family, and they'd come after him with a vengeance that had nearly swept me and the girls up in its wake. I'd changed our names, moved to a different borough, taken this job with false references that had somehow passed inspection. I needed the money. But more than that, I needed the protection of working in a place so dangerous that my ex-husband's enemies would never think to look for me here. The enemy of my enemy, as they say. A sound from the hallway made me freeze. Footsteps, heavy and purposeful, approaching the study. I glanced at my watch. Only 20 minutes had passed. It couldn't be Mr. DeLuca, not yet. His meeting wasn't for another half hour. The door swung open with such force that I jumped, nearly dropping the feather duster I'd been using on the bookshelf. Marco DeLuca stood in the doorway, his presence filling the space with an energy that made the air feel heavy. He was younger than I'd expected when I'd first seen him. Maybe 35, with dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. His suit probably cost more than I'd earned in the past year, tailored to emphasize broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. But it was his eyes that caught me, dark and calculating, the eyes of a man who'd seen too much and forgiven too little. Behind him stood two other men, similarly dressed, similarly dangerous. I recognized them from my brief glimpses during my time here. His closest associates, men who carried guns beneath their expensive jackets and answered to no law except his. "Get out," one of them said to me, his voice flat and cold. I dropped into a small curtsy, keeping my eyes down. "Of course, sir. I apologize. Mrs. Benedetti sent me to clean, but I'll come back later." I moved toward the door, clutching my supplies, desperate to escape this unexpected encounter. But as I passed close to Marco DeLuca, something happened that made my blood run cold. My phone, tucked in the pocket of my uniform, began to ring. The ringtone, a cheerful children's song that Sophia and Emma had programmed as the default, shattered the tense silence. I fumbled for it, my face burning with embarrassment, trying to silence it quickly. But in my haste, I dropped it. The phone clattered to the floor, spinning on the polished wood before coming to rest face up. The screen displayed a photo. My daughters. Their smiling faces, gap-toothed grins, arms around each other in the tiny playground near our apartment. Above the photo, the caller ID read, "Mrs. Chen." I snatched up the phone, silencing it with shaking hands, but it was too late. Marco DeLuca's eyes had fixed on the screen, on the faces of my children, with an intensity that made me want to run. "You have children," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again. I'll turn it off during work hours, I promise." "How old are they?" The question stopped my babbling apology. I looked up at him, confused by the genuine curiosity in his tone. "6, sir. Twins." Something flickered across his face, too quick for me to identify. "And their father?" I hesitated. The truth was dangerous, but a lie might be worse if he decided to verify my story. "He's not in the picture, sir." Marco studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes moving from my face to the phone still clutched in my hand, then back again. I could feel the weight of his assessment, feel him cataloging every detail about me with the precision of a man who survived by reading people accurately. "Mrs. Benedetti didn't mention you had children when she hired you," he said, finally. My heart sank. This was it. I would be fired, lose the job I desperately needed, lose the thin shield of protection this position provided. "I didn't think it was relevant, sir. They don't interfere with my work. I never bring them here. I never—" "Why are you working here, Lucia?" The use of my name startled me. I hadn't realized he even knew it. "I need the money, sir. The pay is good, and—" "That's not what I asked." He took a step closer, and I fought the urge to back away. "Why here? In my house? Do you know what I do? What this family does?" "I don't ask questions, sir. I just clean." "Smart answer." He turned to his associates. "Leave us." The two men exchanged glances but obeyed without question, pulling the door closed behind them. The sound of it clicking shut seemed to echo through my bones. Marco moved to his desk, settling into the leather chair behind it, with the casual grace of a predator. He gestured to one of the chairs facing the desk. "Sit." "Sir, I really should get back to work." "Sit. Down." I sat. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "You've been here 3 months. Mrs. Benedetti says you're quiet, efficient, never late. You keep to yourself, don't gossip with the other staff. That's unusual." "I just try to do my job well, sir." "Most people try to do their jobs well, but they also make friends, form connections. You don't. Why?" "Because connections were dangerous. Because the more people who knew about me, the more likely someone might recognize my face from before, might connect me to Antonio, might realize I was hiding. But I couldn't say any of that. I'm just shy, sir." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You're lying, but I'll let it pass for now." He opened a drawer in his desk, pulling out a file. My file. He flipped it open, scanning the contents. Lucia Alvarez, 27, widowed, no family in New York, previous employment at a hotel in New Jersey, references from people who don't exist. My blood turned to ice. He knew. Of course he knew. A man like Marco DeLuca didn't hire people without thorough background checks. He'd known from the beginning that my story was false. "I can explain," I started. "No need." He closed the file. "I know who you are. I know who your ex-husband is. I know what he did, and I know why you're running." I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to be closing in around me, the walls pressing inward. "Please," I whispered. "Please don't hurt my daughters. They have nothing to do with any of this. I'll leave. I'll disappear. Just please." "Calm down." His voice cut through my panic. "If I wanted to hurt you or your children, you'd already be dead. I don't wage war against women and children. That's not how I operate." The statement should have reassured me. Instead, it left me more confused. "Then why tell me you know? Why not just fire me?" "Because your phone rang at an interesting time." He stood, moving around the desk to lean against it, closer to me now. "Mrs. Chen, the woman watching your daughters, she only calls during your work hours if there's an emergency." Oh God, the girls. Something had happened to the girls. I fumbled with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. 3 missed calls from Mrs. Chen. A text message. "Call me immediately. Girls asking for you. Won't stop crying." "I have to go," I said, standing abruptly. "I'm sorry, sir. I know this is unprofessional, but I have to." "Go," he said simply. "Take the rest of the day. We'll discuss this later." I didn't wait for him to change his mind. I grabbed my supplies and fled, running through the mansion's corridors like the demons of hell were at my heels. Perhaps they were. I called Mrs. Chen from the service entrance, rain soaking through my uniform as I waited for her to answer. "Lucia, thank God. The girls, they're okay physically, but something's wrong. They woke up this morning crying about nightmares, asking for you, saying someone was watching the apartment. I tried to calm them down, but they're so scared, and I don't know what to do. I'm coming home now. Keep them inside. Lock all the doors and windows. I'll be there as soon as I can." But even as I said the words, I knew it might already be too late. If Antonio's enemies had found us, if they were watching, then running would only delay the inevitable. Behind me, through the rain-streaked windows of the mansion, I could see the silhouette of Marco DeLuca standing in his study, watching me leave, making calculations I couldn't begin to understand. I had nowhere left to hide. And somehow, impossibly, the most dangerous man in New York might be my only hope for survival. The subway ride back to Queens felt like an eternity. Every face in the crowded car seemed suspicious, every glance in my direction potentially threatening. I clutched my phone against my chest, reading and rereading Mrs. Chen's text, trying to convince myself that the girls were just being dramatic. 6-year-olds had vivid imaginations. Nightmares were normal. There was no reason to panic. But deep in my gut, I knew better. Mothers have instincts about danger to their children, primitive warnings that bypass logic and go straight to the core of survival. Something was wrong. When I finally reached our building, a rundown 6-story walk-up in a neighborhood that gentrification had forgotten, I took the stairs 2 at a time despite my exhausted legs. Mrs. Chen lived on the same floor as us, 3 doors down, her apartment a mirror image of mine except filled with 40 years of accumulated memories, instead of our sparse, temporary existence. She opened the door before I could knock, her weathered face creased with worry. Behind her, I could see Sophia and Emma huddled together on the couch, their small bodies pressed so close they looked like one person. When they saw me, they launched themselves across the room. "Mama! Mama!" They crashed into me with the force of small hurricanes, arms wrapping around my waist, faces buried in my stomach. I felt their tears soaking through my damp uniform. "Shh, it's okay. I'm here now," I murmured, stroking their dark hair, inhaling the familiar scent of the cheap children's shampoo I bought at the dollar store. "Tell Mama what happened." Sophia, always the braver one, pulled back enough to look up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "There was a man outside the window last night. I saw him looking at our apartment. We were sleeping in your bed because we had bad dreams," Emma added, her voice trembling. "And when Sophia got up to get water, she saw him standing across the street, just staring at our building." "It was dark," I said gently, trying to inject reason into their fear. "Maybe it was just a shadow, or—" "It was a man, Mama," Sophia insisted with the stubborn certainty only a child can possess. "He had a phone and he was taking pictures, and when I went to the window he saw me and smiled. It was a scary smile. Ice flooded my veins. Children don't make up details like that. They might imagine monsters under the bed, but they don't invent specific details about strangers with cameras unless something real had triggered the fear." Mrs. Chen touched my arm. "I believe them, Lucia. This morning when I brought them to my apartment, I looked out my window. There was a car parked across the street that wasn't there yesterday. Dark sedan, tinted windows. It's been there for 3 hours." I moved to her window, careful to stay to the side, and peered through the yellowed curtains. There it was. Black sedan, maybe 5 years old, clean despite the neighborhood's grime. Professional, deliberate, watching. "Mrs. Chen, can you keep the girls for a few more hours? I need to handle something." "Of course, but Lucia, maybe you should call the police." "No police." The words came out sharper than I intended. Police meant questions. Questions meant background checks. Background checks meant Antonio would find out where I was. The prison information network was efficient. "I'll take care of this. Just please keep them here. Don't let them go back to my apartment." I kissed both girls, holding them tighter than usual, breathing them in like I might never get another chance. Then I forced myself to let go and walked back down the hallway to my own apartment. My phone vibrated as I unlocked the door. Unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something made me answer. "Lucia Alvarez?" A man's voice, rough with a thick accent I couldn't place. Russian, maybe, or Eastern European. "Who is this?" "Someone who has been looking for you for a very long time. We need to talk about your husband." "Ex-husband," I corrected automatically, my heart hammering. "And I have nothing to do with whatever Antonio did. I left him. I don't know anything." "That's not what he told us. He said you knew where he kept the money he stole from us. He's lying. I never knew anything about his business. I was just... We don't believe you, but that's okay. We're patient. We can wait. We can watch. Your daughters are very pretty, by the way. Sophia and Emma, yes. Such beautiful girls. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering on the floor. By the time I picked it up, the line was dead. They knew my daughters' names. They had been watching long enough to identify which children were mine. Long enough to take pictures, to learn our routines, to plan. I sank onto the couch, my legs no longer able to support me. This was it. The nightmare I'd been running from had finally caught up. Antonio's debts had become my daughter's death sentence. My phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number. The DeLuca mansion. I almost didn't answer, but some desperate instinct made me press accept. Where are you? Marco DeLuca's voice, clipped and commanding. Home. In Queens. Mr. DeLuca, I'm sorry about leaving so abruptly, but are your daughters safe? The question startled me. They're with my neighbor. Why do you? Because there are 2 men sitting outside your building in a black sedan. They've been there since 8 this morning. My security noticed them when they did a routine check of my employees' addresses. You track your employees' addresses. Of course you do. Nothing escaped Marco DeLuca's surveillance. I know, I whispered. They called me. They think I know where Antonio hid money he stole from them. They threatened my daughters. A long silence on the other end. Then, pack a bag. Essential items only. You have 15 minutes. What? No, I can't just... 15 minutes, Lucia. I'm sending a car. It's already on its way. You and your daughters are coming back here. Mr. DeLuca, I appreciate the concern, but I can't involve you in this. These people are dangerous and... more dangerous than me? There was something almost amused in his tone. Trust me, Lucia. They're not. Pack the bag. Get your daughters. My driver will be there in 10 minutes. Don't make him wait. The line went dead. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing through impossible options. Run? Where? They'd found me once. They'd find me again. Go to the police? Even if I could trust them, what would I say? Some vague threats from a man I couldn't identify? Stay here and wait for them to make their move? The image of Sophia describing that man's smile flashed through my mind. The cold calculation in his expression when he realized she'd seen him. Men like that didn't make empty threats. I grabbed the ancient duffel bag from my closet and started throwing in essentials. Clothes for the girls, their favorite stuffed animals, documents I'd hidden in a shoebox under the bed, my own sparse wardrobe, the small amount of cash I'd managed to save. 15 minutes became 12, then 10. I was zipping up the bag when I heard the knock at Mrs. Chen's door. A male voice, polite but firm. Mrs. Chen? I'm here to pick up Mrs. Alvarez and her daughters. I grabbed the bag and practically ran down the hallway. Through Mrs. Chen's peephole, I could see a man in a dark suit, professional and dangerous in that carefully controlled way that marked all of Marco's people. Behind him, I could glimpse the interior of a black SUV with tinted windows. It's okay, I told Mrs. Chen, who looked terrified. He's with my employer. We're going to stay at the estate for a few days. The lie rolled smoothly off my tongue. Mrs. Chen looked skeptical, but relieved. The girls, however, were less easily convinced. Where are we going, Mama? Emma asked, her small hand gripping mine tightly as we descended the stairs. Somewhere safe, baby. Somewhere the bad dreams can't find you. The driver opened the SUV door without a word, his eyes scanning the street with professional efficiency. I noticed the slight bulge under his jacket that indicated a weapon. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back at our building, at the black sedan still parked across the street. One of the men in the sedan was on his phone, probably reporting our departure. probably calling in reinforcements, probably planning their next move. The drive to Manhattan took longer than it should have. The driver took a circuitous route, doubling back several times, making turns that seemed random, but I realized were designed to ensure we weren't followed. The girls sat on either side of me, strangely quiet, sensing the gravity of the situation, even if they couldn't understand it. When we finally arrived at the DeLuca mansion, it looked different from this perspective. Less like a workplace and more like a fortress. High walls, security cameras, men stationed at various points around the perimeter, safe, protected, dangerous in a different way than what we were running from. Marco met us at the entrance himself, which surprised me. Men of his position didn't usually concern themselves with the arrival of employees, even under unusual circumstances. He looked down at Sophia and Emma, his expression unreadable. "You must be the twins I've heard about." Sophia, never one to be intimidated, stared back at him with open curiosity. "Are you Mama's boss? She says you're very important." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I suppose I am. And your mother is right. I am very important. Which means when I tell you that you're safe here, you can believe me. Nobody will hurt you in this house. Do you understand?" Both girls nodded solemnly. "Good." He looked at me. "Mrs. Benedetti has prepared rooms in the East Wing. 3 bedrooms connected. You'll stay there until we resolve this situation. Mr. DeLuca, I can't." "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. "We'll discuss the details after you've settled in. For now, just know that you're under my protection. All 3 of you." Mrs. Benedetti appeared, her usual stern expression softened slightly by the presence of the children. "Come with me. I'll show you to your rooms." As we followed her through the labyrinth of hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just traded one form of captivity for another. But at least this cage had high walls and armed guards. At least my daughters would be safe. For now. That night, after the girls had finally fallen asleep in the massive bed in their new room, exhausted by the day's chaos, I stood at the window of my own assigned bedroom and stared out at the manicured grounds. Somewhere out there, beyond these walls, Antonio's enemies were regrouping, planning, waiting. A knock at my door made me jump. I opened it to find Marco standing in the hallway, still dressed despite the late hour. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Would you, knowing that people are planning to hurt your children?" He stepped into the room without invitation, closing the door behind him. The gesture felt intimate in a way that made me uncomfortable, though he maintained a respectful distance. "I've made some calls," he said. "The men watching your building work for the Volkov Bratva. Russian organized crime. Your ex-husband stole over $2 million from them before he was arrested. They've been looking for it ever since. I don't have their money. I never knew anything about it. I believe you, but they don't. To them, you're leverage. A way to pressure Antonio into revealing where he hid it. So what happens now? Do you just hand me over?" The question came out more bitter than I intended. Marco's eyes narrowed. "Is that what you think? That I brought you here to trade you? I don't know what to think, Mr. DeLuca. Men like you don't do favors out of the kindness of their hearts. There's always a price." He laughed, a short, harsh sound. "You're right. There is always a price. But it's not what you're imagining." He moved closer, and I fought the urge to back away. "The price is that you trust me. You follow my instructions. You let me handle this situation my way." "And what's your way?" "I'm going to have a conversation with the Volkov Bratva. I'm going to explain to them that you and your daughters are under my protection now. That means they're off limits, untouchable. Why would they care about your protection?" His smile was cold and dangerous. "Because they know what happens to people who ignore my warnings. Because I have resources and alliances they need. because starting a war with me over $2 million would cost them much more than they'd ever recover. It made sense in a brutal, calculated way. But it also bound me to him, created a debt I might spend the rest of my life repaying. "What do you want in return?" I asked quietly. Marco studied me for a long moment, his dark eyes revealing nothing. "Loyalty," he said finally. "You work for me. You live under my roof. You follow my rules. In exchange, your daughters grow up safe. They go to good schools. They never worry about where their next meal comes from. They never look over their shoulders in fear." "That's it? Just loyalty?" "Don't underestimate the value of loyalty, Lucia. It's the only currency that matters in my world." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and one more thing. You don't lie to me, not ever. I knew your background was fabricated from the moment Mrs. Benedetti brought me your file. I hired you anyway because I respect survival instincts, but from now on, honesty, always. Can you do that?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Good, get some rest. Tomorrow morning, we begin preparing for the conversation with the Volkovs. You'll need to tell me everything about Antonio. Everything he said, everywhere he went, anyone he met. Every detail, no matter how insignificant it seems." After he left, I returned to the window, watching the security guards patrol the grounds. I'd just made a deal with the devil, traded one dangerous man for another. But at least this devil had promised to keep my daughters safe. And in my world, that was the only thing that mattered. I walked to the girls' room and slipped inside, settling into the chair beside their bed. They slept peacefully, their faces relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. Sophia's hand was curled around Emma's, even in sleep unwilling to let her twin go. I would do anything to protect them, even if it meant selling my soul to Marco De Luca, even if it meant I could never escape again. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of my new room, casting everything in a muted golden glow that felt almost surreal. For the first 3 seconds after waking, I forgot where I was. Then memory crashed back, dragging with it the full weight of yesterday's choices. I heard giggles from the adjoining room. The twins. Somehow, impossibly, they sounded happy. I found them in the hallway outside their bedroom, wearing the clothes I'd packed from our apartment, but looking wildly out of place against the marble and gold leaf that decorated this wing of the mansion. Mrs. Benedetti stood nearby, her stern expression considerably softer than usual. "They were exploring," she explained. "I was just about to bring them to the breakfast room." "We saw a real library, Mama," Emma announced, bouncing on her toes. "With a ladder that slides along the shelves. Can we go back later?" "Maybe," I said carefully, uncertain what rules governed our new existence. Were we guests? Prisoners? Something in between? Mrs. Benedetti seemed to read my confusion. "Mr. De Luca has made it clear that the children are welcome anywhere in the main house. The only restricted areas are his private office, the security wing, and the basement levels." She paused. "For you, the same applies, though he wishes to see you in his study after breakfast." Of course he did. Breakfast turned out to be an elaborate affair in a dining room that could have seated 20. The twins' eyes went wide at the spread: fresh fruit, pastries, eggs prepared 3 different ways, bacon, sausages, toast with real butter, and juice that actually tasted like oranges instead of artificial flavoring. "Is this all for us?" Sophia whispered, awed. "It's what Mr. De Luca has for breakfast every day," Mrs. Benedetti replied. "Please, eat. You're too thin, all of you." I watched my daughters load their plates with more food than they'd seen in weeks, trying not to feel the shame that came with accepting charity from a man like Marco De Luca. Pride was a luxury I could no longer afford. After breakfast, I left the girls with Mrs. Benedetti, who'd promised to show them the library properly, and made my way to Marco's study, the same room where, just yesterday, everything had changed. He was already there, seated behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. 3 other men occupied the chairs facing him, their conversation stopping abruptly when I entered. "Gentlemen," Marco said smoothly, "we'll continue this later. Leave us." They filed out without question, though I caught the curious glances they threw my way. The door closed, leaving us in familiar, uncomfortable privacy. "Sit," Marco said, gesturing to one of the newly vacated chairs. I sat, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from trembling. "I need you to tell me about Antonio," he began without preamble. "Start from the beginning. How did you meet?" The question opened a door I'd been keeping firmly locked, but I'd promised honesty, and I had no choice but to deliver. "I was 19, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Working at a restaurant in Newark. He came in one night with friends, said I was the prettiest girl he'd ever seen. He was charming, generous with tips, always smiling." "How long before he asked you out?" 2 weeks. He brought me flowers, real roses, not the cheap ones from the bodega. He took me to expensive places, bought me dresses I could never afford, made me feel special, important." Marco's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps. He knew the pattern. Predators always followed the same script. "When did it change?" "After we got married. 6 months of courtship, then a quick wedding because I was pregnant with the girls." I paused, forcing myself to continue. "He said we needed to save money, that starting a family was expensive. So we moved to a cheaper apartment. He started coming home later, drinking more. The first time he hit me, I was 4 months pregnant." The memory made my stomach churn. The shock of it, the betrayal, the way he'd apologized afterward with tears in his eyes, swearing it would never happen again. "But it did happen again," Marco said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Many times. I thought about leaving, but I had nowhere to go. No family, no money of my own. And then the twins were born, and I couldn't risk being homeless with 2 babies. So you stayed, for 6 years." The judgment I expected didn't come. Instead, there was something almost like understanding in his tone. "I stayed until I realized he would eventually kill me," I said bluntly. The violence was escalating. He was involved in things he wouldn't talk about, bringing home money we couldn't explain. I heard phone conversations in Russian, saw him meeting with men who looked like they'd come straight from a crime movie. "Did you know he was stealing from the Volkov Bratva?" "Not until after. I just knew something was very wrong. One night he came home with a black eye and broken ribs. He locked himself in the bathroom for hours and I heard him crying. The next morning, he was gone, just vanished. Left a note saying he was sorry, that he'd made terrible mistakes, that we should forget him." "And you did? You just let him go?" A bitter laugh escaped me. What choice did I have? I was relieved he was gone. But then the bills started piling up, and I realized all our accounts were empty. He'd drained everything, left us with nothing. Marco leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin in that gesture I was learning to recognize as his thinking pose. "When did you discover he'd been arrested?" 3 months later. A detective showed up at our apartment, said Antonio had been picked up trying to cross into Canada with fake passports. They found evidence of embezzlement, money laundering, connections to organized crime. The detective wanted to know if I had information about his activities. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that I knew nothing, that I was just his wife, kept in the dark about everything important." I met his eyes. He didn't believe me. He said wives always know, that I was either lying or dangerously naive. "Which were you?" The question stung. "Both, probably. I didn't want to know. Knowing would have made me complicit. It was easier to pretend that the money he brought home was legitimate, that the strange phone calls were just business, that the men he met with were colleagues. Willful ignorance, Marco observed, but without the condemnation I expected. A survival strategy, not uncommon. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked the grounds. Antonio is in Sing Sing, correct? Maximum security. Yes, 20 years for the embezzlement and fraud charges. They couldn't prove the connection to the Bratva, so he avoided the heavier sentences. But the Volkovs haven't forgotten, and now they think you're the key to recovering their money. Money I don't have. Money I've never seen. Marco turned back to face me. Let's assume that's true. Let's assume Antonio never told you anything. The Volkovs don't care. To them, you're leverage, a way to motivate Antonio to cooperate. Then why am I here? If I'm useless to them, I'm useless to you too. His expression shifted, became something I couldn't quite read. You're here because nobody touches what's mine. I told you yesterday that you and your daughters are under my protection. That wasn't a temporary offer, Lucia. It's a permanent arrangement. The weight of those words settled over me like a heavy blanket. Permanent. No escape. No going back to my old life, as difficult as it had been. I don't understand, I said carefully. Why would you do this? You don't know me. My problems aren't your problems. That's where you're wrong. He moved closer, perching on the edge of his desk directly in front of me. The moment those men started watching my employees home, it became my problem. The moment they threatened children under my roof, it became personal. But we weren't under your roof. We were in Queens. You worked for me. In my world, that's the same thing. He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I have rules, Lucia. One of them is that I protect my people, all of them. The men who work directly for me, the people who cook my food, the women who clean my house. You became my responsibility the day Mrs. Benedetti hired you. It was a pretty speech, but I'd learned the hard way that pretty speeches from dangerous men usually hid ugly truths. What do you really want? I asked. What's the real reason you're helping us? For the first time since I'd met him, Marco De Luca looked almost uncertain. He studied me for a long moment before speaking. The truth? I don't know. I saw your daughter's picture on your phone yesterday, and something shifted. I've spent my entire adult life in this world, making decisions that prioritize power and money over everything else. I've hurt people. I've ordered things done that would horrify most civilians. But I have lines I don't cross. Children are one of them. He stood, pacing to the bookshelf and back. When I was 7 years old, my father was killed by a rival family. They shot him in his car while I was sitting in the back seat. I remember the blood. I remember my mother's screams when they told her. I remember men with guns standing in our house, deciding whether to kill us too or let us live. The raw honesty in his voice made me lean forward despite myself. They let us live, not out of mercy, but because killing women and children would have started a war that nobody wanted. My uncle took over the family business, and I grew up understanding that this life, this world, comes with a code. You don't touch children. Ever. So this is about your father? I asked quietly. About avenging something that happened decades ago? This is about making sure your daughters don't spend their lives looking over their shoulders the way I did. This is about breaking a cycle that should never have started. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe that his motives were pure, that he was some kind of dangerous guardian angel. But life had taught me to be suspicious of saviors. And what happens when the Volkovs don't care about your protection? I challenged. What happens when they decide the money is worth the war? Then we have a war. He said it so simply as if discussing the weather. But we won't. Viktor Volkov is pragmatic. He understands cost-benefit analysis. Losing men and resources to recover $2 million that may not exist is bad business. You seem very confident. I am. I've known Victor for 15 years. We've had our disagreements, but we respect each other's territories. He'll listen when I explain the situation. When? Tonight. He's agreed to meet with me. Neutral territory. Just the two of us and our seconds. My stomach dropped. You're meeting with them tonight? What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong. But even as he said it, I caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his hand moved unconsciously toward his jacket, where I knew he kept a gun. I want to come with you, I said suddenly. Marco's eyebrows rose. Absolutely not. Why? I'm the one they want. Maybe if they see me, talk to me, they'll realize I really don't know anything. Or they'll grab you the moment you're outside these walls. No, Lucia, you stay here with your daughters where you're safe. Safe, I repeated bitterly. Is that what you call this? Hiding behind your walls while you negotiate my life with Russian criminals? His expression hardened. Yes, that's exactly what I call it. And you'd be smart to recognize the difference between a luxurious safe house and the alternative. He was right, of course. But accepting it felt like surrendering the last scrap of control I had over my own life. What do I tell the girls? I asked quietly. How do I explain why we're living in a stranger's mansion? Why we can't go home? Tell them it's temporary. Tell them your employer offered you better accommodations while your building undergoes repairs. Tell them whatever you need to tell them to keep them calm and happy. He softened slightly. They seem resilient. They'll adapt. They shouldn't have to adapt to this. They should be normal children, with normal problems, living normal lives. Normal is overrated, Marco said. And it doesn't exist anyway. Everyone's fighting their own battles, carrying their own scars. Your daughters just happen to be fighting battles they didn't choose. But they're not alone. They have you. And now they have me. The possessiveness in that last statement should have frightened me. Instead, it brought a strange sense of relief. Whatever else Marco De Luca was, he was powerful enough to stand between my children and the monsters hunting us. Thank you, I said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. He nodded, accepting the gratitude without false modesty. Go spend the day with your daughters. Mrs. Benedetti will show you the grounds. Let them explore. Let them be children. Tonight I'll handle the adults' business. I stood to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Lucia? I turned back. The library has a collection of children's books on the third shelf, from the bottom in the east corner. I had them brought in this morning. I thought Sophia and Emma might enjoy them. The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught me off guard. This was a man who killed people for living, who ruled a criminal empire with an iron fist, and he'd ordered children's books to make my daughters comfortable. Thank you, I said again, meaning it more this time. As I left his study, I realized I was crying. Not from fear or sadness, but from something more complicated. Relief, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion from carrying the weight alone for so long. For better or worse, I'd made my choice. Now I would have to live with the consequences. The afternoon passed in a strange suspension of reality. I watched Sophia and Emma explore the mansion's library with the enthusiasm of children who'd never had access to so many books. Mrs. Benedetti had been surprisingly patient, helping them reach the higher shelves and suggesting stories appropriate for their age. This one has a princess who saves herself, Emma announced, clutching a worn copy of a fairy tale book. Can we read it tonight, Mama? Of course, baby. But even as I smiled at them, my mind was elsewhere, calculating the hours until Marco's meeting with Victor Volkov, imagining all the ways it could go wrong. Picturing scenarios where he didn't come back, where the fragile protection we'd found here vanished in gunfire and blood. You're worried about him. I turned to find Mrs. Benedetti standing beside me, Her arms crossed over her chest in that characteristic stance that made her look perpetually disapproving even when she wasn't. "I'm worried about my daughters," I corrected. "Same thing, in this case." She gestured for me to follow her away from where the girls were absorbed in their books. In the hallway, she spoke more quietly. "Mr. DeLuca doesn't do things like this. Bringing in strays, involving himself in other people's problems. It's not his way." "Then why is he doing it?" Mrs. Benedetti studied me with sharp eyes that had probably seen decades of the DeLuca family's secrets. "I've worked for this family for 32 years. Started when Marco's father was still alive. Continued through all the violence that followed. I've seen Marco grow from a traumatized boy into the man he is now. And in all that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at your daughters yesterday." My breath caught. "What do you mean? Like he was seeing ghosts? Like he was remembering something he spent years trying to forget?" She paused. "Marco had a sister once, younger than him by 5 years. Twins, like your girls. They died when he was 17. The information landed like a physical blow. How? Car bomb meant for his uncle. The girls were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Marco blamed himself for years. Still does, probably, though he'd never admit it." Mrs. Benedetti's expression softened slightly. "So when he saw your daughters in danger, when he realized he had the power to protect them where he couldn't protect his sisters, well, it explains a lot." It did explain a lot, but it also made everything more complicated. Marco wasn't helping us out of pure altruism or even strategic interest. He was trying to save his dead sisters through mine. "That's not fair to him," I said quietly. "Using my children to heal his trauma." "No," Mrs. Benedetti agreed. "But life rarely is. The question is whether you're willing to accept his protection knowing the truth behind it." Before I could answer, one of Marco's men appeared in the hallway. Tall, built like a boxer, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. I'd seen him before, always at Marco's side during important meetings. "Mrs. Alvarez, Mr. DeLuca wants to see you before he leaves." My stomach tightened. "Now?" "Now." I followed him through the maze of corridors to a different room than the study. This one was smaller, more intimate. A private sitting room with leather furniture and walls lined with photographs. Family photographs, I realized. Marco at various ages, his parents, and yes, 2 young girls with dark hair and bright smiles. Marco stood with his back to me, staring at one photograph in particular. The twins, maybe 6 or 7 years old, identical in appearance down to the ribbons in their hair. "Her name was Isabella," he said without turning. "She was the brave one, always protecting her sister. Sophia was gentler, more artistic. She drew constantly, filled notebooks with pictures of flowers and birds and imaginary creatures. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent." He finally turned to face me. He'd changed clothes, trading the business suit for something darker and more tactical. Under the jacket, I could see the outline of a shoulder holster. "Mrs. Benedetti told you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Good. I want you to understand why I'm doing this. It's not charity, Lucia. It's not strategy. It's..." He paused, searching for words. "It's necessary. For me as much as for you, I understand." "Do you?" He moved closer, his dark eyes intense. "Do you understand that I'm going into this meeting tonight willing to start a war to keep your daughters safe? That I'll burn down half of Brighton Beach if that's what it takes to make Victor Volkov understand that you're untouchable?" The violence in his words should have terrified me. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Something dangerous and complicated that I refused to examine too closely. "What if it's not enough?" I asked. "What if he doesn't care about your threats?" "Then I make them reality." He said it so simply, as if discussing business logistics rather than mass murder. Victor is a businessman. He'll understand the math. $2 million isn't worth the cost of going to war with me. And if he tries to take me anyway? Marco's expression went cold. Then he dies, along with anyone stupid enough to help him. A knock at the door interrupted us. The scarred man from earlier. "Boss, it's time." Marco nodded, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. A phone, but more sophisticated than any I'd seen. "This is for you. It's secure, encrypted. My number is already programmed in. If anything happens, anything at all, you call me immediately. Understand?" I took the phone, its weight heavy in my palm. "Nothing's going to happen. We're safe here." "Humor me." He glanced toward the hallway where I'd left the girls. "Take care of them. And yourself." Then he was gone, moving with that predatory grace that marked him as dangerous. I stood alone in the room full of ghosts, clutching a phone that connected me to a man I barely knew but had somehow become entirely dependent on. The evening stretched endlessly. I read to the girls, helped them prepare for bed in their new room, stayed with them until they fell asleep. Then I paced my own room, checking the phone every few minutes even though I knew Marco wouldn't call unless something was wrong. Mrs. Benedetti brought me dinner on a tray, but I couldn't eat. The food tasted like ash, my stomach too knotted with anxiety to accept anything. "He's done this 100 times, she said, watching me push pasta around the plate. "Meeting with rivals, negotiating treaties. He knows what he's doing. That doesn't mean something can't go wrong." "No," she admitted. "It doesn't." She left me alone with my thoughts and the untouched dinner. I moved to the window, staring out at the grounds lit by strategic spotlights. Security guards patrolled at regular intervals, professional and alert. Whatever else this place was, it was defended like a military installation. The phone buzzed at 11:30, making me jump. But it wasn't Marco. It was a text from an unknown number. "Your employer is very persuasive. We have reached an understanding. You and your children are no longer of interest to us. Consider your debt cleared." I read it 3 times, trying to determine if it was real or some kind of trap. Then another message came through, this time from Marco's number. "It's done. Victor accepted my terms. You're safe." The relief hit me so hard my knees buckled. I sank onto the bed, clutching the phone, tears streaming down my face. Safe. We were safe. Marco returned an hour later. I heard the commotion of his arrival, the voices in the hallway, the sound of cars in the driveway. I should have stayed in my room, maintained professional distance. Instead, I found myself hurrying downstairs, needing to see him with my own eyes. He stood in the entrance hall, surrounded by his men, blood on his knuckles and a cut above his left eye. Not his blood, I realized. Or at least not all of it. Our eyes met across the space. Something passed between us, unspoken but powerful. "It's done," he said, echoing the text. "Victor has agreed to leave you alone. In exchange, I've provided him with information about Antonio's location within Sing Sing. He'll handle the debt collection personally." The implication was clear. Antonio would pay for his crimes, one way or another. I should have felt something. Grief, maybe, or guilt. Instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Thank you," I said. Marco dismissed his men with a gesture, leaving us alone in the cavernous hall. He approached slowly, as if afraid I might bolt. "You're bleeding," I said, noticing a deeper cut on his temple that I'd missed before. "It's nothing." Victor wanted to test whether I was serious about my protection. I had to prove it. By fighting him? A slight smile. Old school diplomacy. He respects physical strength more than words. I gave him what he needed to understand I meant what I said. Without thinking, I reached up to touch the cut. He flinched slightly, then stilled, letting me examine it. You need this cleaned. It could get infected. Lucia, let me. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe gratitude. Maybe something more dangerous. You saved my daughters. The least I can do is make sure you don't die from a preventable infection. He let me lead him to a nearby bathroom, a powder room done in black marble and gold fixtures. I found a first aid kit under the sink and set about cleaning the cuts on his face and knuckles. He sat on the closed toilet lid, watching me work with an intensity that made my hands shake. You're good at this, he observed. Practice. The bitter truth slipped out before I could stop it. Antonio gave me plenty of opportunities to learn basic medical care. Marco's jaw tightened. He's going to suffer for what he did to you. Victor's methods aren't gentle. Good. I pressed an alcohol-soaked pad to his temple, making him hiss. Sorry. Don't be. I deserve it for getting hit in the first place. I worked in silence for a few moments, hyper-aware of his proximity, of the heat radiating from his body, of the way his eyes never left my face. Why? I asked finally. Why risk so much for people you barely know? I told you the truth, not the story about your sisters, though I'm sure that's part of it. The real reason. He caught my wrist, stilling my hand against his face. Because when I saw those little girls' picture on your phone, terrified and asking for their mother, I saw an opportunity to do something right. To use this power I've built, this empire of violence and fear, to actually protect someone who deserved it. His grip tightened slightly. I've done terrible things, Lucia. I'll do more terrible things before I die. But maybe, just this once, I can be the hero instead of the monster. The vulnerability in his confession broke something inside me. This man, this dangerous, powerful man, was as broken as I was, just in different ways. You're not a monster, I whispered. Yes, I am. But maybe around you and your daughters, I can pretend I'm something else. We stayed like that, frozen in the moment, his hand around my wrist, my fingers still pressed to his wounded temple. The air between us felt charged, dangerous, full of possibilities that terrified me. A sound from upstairs broke the spell. One of the twins, calling for me. I should go, I said, pulling away. He released me immediately. Of course. I cleaned up the first aid supplies, very aware of his eyes tracking my movements. At the door, I paused. Marco? Yes? Thank you. For everything. For my daughters' lives. His expression softened. You don't have to thank me, Lucia. Protecting you isn't a favor, it's... He stopped, seeming to search for the right word. It's what I'm supposed to do. I left before I could do something foolish. Like kiss him. Like thanking him in ways that would change everything between us. Upstairs, I found Emma awake, tangled in her unfamiliar sheets. Mama, I had a bad dream. Just a dream, baby. You're safe now. We're all safe. And as I held my daughter, stroking her hair until she fell back asleep, I realized I meant it. For the first time in 6 years, we were truly safe. But safety had come with a price. A debt to a dangerous man that I might spend the rest of my life repaying. The question was whether I minded as much as I should. The days that followed took on a rhythm I hadn't expected. Morning routines with the girls, breakfast in the dining room, then hours spent in the library or the gardens while Marco conducted his business. From the outside, we might have looked like a strange, unconventional family. Mrs. Benedetti had enrolled Sophia and Emma in a private school nearby, arranged through connections I didn't question. The twins adapted with the resilience of children, accepting their new circumstances with fewer questions than they probably should have asked. They knew Mama's work had changed, that we were living somewhere safer, that the scary men weren't coming back. They didn't need to know more than that. What I hadn't anticipated was how Marco would integrate himself into their lives. The first morning he appeared at breakfast specifically to eat with us, I assumed it was coincidence. By the third morning, I realized it was intentional. He asked about their school day, admired their artwork, helped Emma with a difficult math problem. With them, his dangerous edge softened into something almost gentle, almost normal. "You're good with them," I observed one afternoon. We were in the garden, watching the twins chase butterflies through the rose bushes. Marco had canceled a meeting to be here, something his men clearly found unusual based on their shocked expressions. I like children. They're honest in ways adults forget how to be. He smiled as Sophia caught a butterfly cupped carefully in her palms, showing it to her sister before releasing it. They remind me of Isabella and Sophia, not just in appearance, but in spirit. Does it hurt, being around them? He considered the question. Yes, but it's a good hurt. The kind that reminds you you're still alive, still capable of feeling something other than rage and calculation. A guard approached, whispered something in Marco's ear. His expression hardened instantly. "Take the girls inside," he said to me quietly. "Now." The tone brooked no argument. I called to Sophia and Emma, keeping my voice light despite the fear coiling in my stomach. "Girls, time to go in. Mrs. Benedetti made cookies." They raced ahead, oblivious to the tension. I glanced back to see Marco speaking rapidly into a phone, his other hand resting on the gun beneath his jacket. Inside, I found Mrs. Benedetti already marshalling the household staff with military efficiency. "Second floor, east wing," she instructed. "Stay away from windows." "What's happening?" "Precaution. Probably nothing." But her face said otherwise. I got the girls settled in their room with a movie, then slipped out into the hallway. Voices drifted up from the ground floor, tense and urgent. I crept to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows. 3 cars spotted near the perimeter, Victor's men. "I thought we had an agreement." Marco's voice, cold with controlled fury. "We do. Victor's honoring it, but someone inside his organization isn't happy about it. Mikhail Volkov, Victor's nephew. He's young, ambitious, thinks his uncle is getting soft. How many men does he have? Maybe a dozen. Not enough to actually breach your security, but enough to cause problems." Marco was silent for a moment, then, "Get Lucia and the children to the safe room, now." Before I could react, strong hands gripped my elbow, one of Marco's guards appearing from nowhere. "This way, Mrs. Alvarez." "What's a safe room?" "Exactly what it sounds like. Mr. DeLuca's orders." He guided me back to the girls' room, collected them with gentle efficiency, and led us down a corridor I'd never noticed before. At the end, a door that looked like part of the wall. He pressed his palm to a scanner, and it slid open to reveal a staircase descending into darkness. "Down," he instructed. Emma clutched my hand. "Mama, I'm scared." "It's okay, baby. It's just a game. Like hide and seek." The safe room turned out to be a fully equipped bunker. Reinforced walls, air filtration system, supplies for weeks, communication equipment, weapons lockers, a prison designed to keep danger out rather than people in. "You'll be safe here," the guard said. "Mr. DeLuca will come get you when it's clear." "Wait, what's happening up there?" "Being handled. Don't worry." He left, the door sealing behind him with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like finality. Sophia explored the room with curiosity while Emma stayed pressed to my side. I found a deck of cards in a drawer and tried to distract them with games, all while straining to hear what was happening above us. Nothing. The room was completely soundproofed. An hour passed, then 2. The girls grew restless, then tired. I found blankets and pillows, created makeshift beds on one of the cots. They fell asleep eventually, exhausted by anxiety they were too young to fully understand. I sat watching them sleep, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios. What if Mikhail's men breached the mansion? What if Marco was hurt? What if we were trapped down here while violence unfolded above us? The door's hydraulic system activated, making me jump. I positioned myself between it and the sleeping girls, grabbing the nearest thing that could serve as a weapon. A metal chair. The door opened. Marco stood there, jacket discarded, shoulder holster visible. Blood splattered across his white shirt. Not his blood, I realized with relief as he stepped inside. His movements were controlled, efficient, showing no signs of injury. "It's over," he said simply. "What happened?" "Mikhail Volkov made a very poor decision. He won't be making any more." The implication was clear. Permanent solution to a temporary problem. "Did you kill him?" "No. I delivered him to his uncle. Victor's handling the family discipline personally." Marco's expression was cold. "But I made my point first. Made sure Mikhail understood exactly why challenging me over you was a fatal mistake." He moved to the cots, looking down at the sleeping twins with an expression I couldn't quite read. Something between protectiveness and profound sadness. "They'll never be completely safe, will they?" I asked quietly. "As long as we're connected to you, there will always be someone like Mikhail trying to use us as leverage." "Yes," he admitted. "That's the reality of my world. But the alternative, sending you back out there, unprotected, is worse. At least here, I can control the variables. Prepare for threats. Respond with overwhelming force." He turned to face me fully. "I'm not going to lie to you, Lucia. Being under my protection makes you a target in some ways, but it also makes you untouchable in others. People like Mikhail are outliers. Most of my enemies know better than to go after women and children. Most isn't all. No. Which is why I'm making changes. Additional security, background checks on everyone who comes within a mile of this property. New protocols." He paused. "And I want you to learn self-defense. Real training. Not just the basics. You need to be able to protect yourself and the girls if I'm not there." The thought of fighting back, of having agency instead of just hiding, sparked something inside me. "I want to learn." "Good. We start tomorrow." Over the next weeks, my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Mornings were for the girls, breakfast, seeing them off to school, managing the strange domesticity of our new existence. Afternoons became training sessions with Marco and his head of security, a former Special Forces operator named James, who taught me how to shoot, how to fight, how to think tactically. "Your instinct is to freeze," James observed during one session. "You need to train yourself to move. Action beats reaction every time." I practiced until my muscles ached, until the movements became automatic. Practiced until I could field strip a Glock in under 30 seconds, until I could escape various holds and grabs, until I could assess a room for exits and threats within moments of entering. Marco watched these sessions sometimes, his expression unreadable. I caught him staring at me during one particularly intense sparring session with James, something dark and complicated in his eyes. "You're a natural," James said after I successfully executed a disarming technique. "Most people take months to develop these instincts. You're doing it in weeks." "Motivation," I said simply. "My daughter's lives depend on it." That evening, after the girls were asleep, I found Marco in his study. The door was open, which I'd learned meant he was available. I knocked anyway. "Come in." He was reviewing documents, the desk lamp casting shadows across his face. He looked tired, I realized, the weight of his empire showing in the lines around his eyes. "I wanted to thank you," I said, "for the training, for everything." "No need. It's in my interest to make sure you can defend yourself." "Is that all it is? Self-interest? He set down his pen, giving me his full attention. What do you want me to say, Lucia? The truth. Why you're really doing all this. He stood, moving around the desk until we were face to face, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the faint scar above his left eyebrow. Because I haven't felt this alive in years, he said quietly. Because watching you with your daughters reminds me that there's still good in the world worth protecting. Because when you smile at me over breakfast, I forget for a moment all the terrible things I've done. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing across my cheekbone. Because you're not afraid of me, not really. You see the monster and you don't run. You stand your ground and demand honesty, and that's rare. I should be afraid, I whispered. You've killed people. You'll kill more. Your world is violent and dangerous. Yes, but I'm not. Afraid, I mean. I know. His voice dropped lower, intimate. Why? Because I've lived with a man who hurt me for no reason except his own inadequacy. And now I'm with a man who would burn down the world to keep my daughters safe. The violence doesn't scare me, Marco. The intention behind it does. And yours. I paused, gathering courage. Yours comes from protection, not domination. You make me sound noble. I'm not. No, but you're honest about what you are. That counts for something. The air between us felt electric, charged with possibility and danger. He leaned closer, his breath warm against my lips. Lucia, if we do this, if we cross this line, there's no going back. You understand that? I understand that I crossed the line the day I accepted your protection. Everything since then has just been pretending we have choices we don't. He kissed me then, gentle despite the violence I knew he was capable of. His hands were careful, reverent even, as if I might break. I kissed him back, pouring 6 years of loneliness and fear into the connection, letting myself feel safe for the first time in recent memory. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. Your daughters are asleep. And even if they weren't, even if they knew, they'd understand eventually. They need a father figure, Marco. Someone strong and reliable. Someone who protects instead of destroys. I'm not their father. No. But you could be something close to it, if you wanted. The vulnerability in his expression nearly broke me. I want, he said simply. God help me. I want things I have no right to want. Then take them. Take us. Make us part of your world officially instead of this half-existence where we're guests who never leave. He pulled back slightly, studying my face as if searching for doubt. You're sure? Once you're mine, Lucia, I don't share. I don't let go. You'd be committing to a life that most people would call a prison. I've lived in a prison. This isn't one. This is sanctuary. I took his hand, pressing it against my heart. I'm sure. What happened next felt inevitable, like gravity pulling us together. He locked the study door, and we discovered each other with the desperation of two people who'd been alone too long. His touch erased the memory of Antonio's cruelty, replaced violence with gentleness, fear with desire. Afterward, we lay tangled together on the leather couch, his jacket cushioning my head, his shirt draped over us like a blanket. I need to tell you something, he said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. About the extent of my organization. What being with me really means. I listened as he explained the reach of the DeLuca empire. The legitimate businesses, real estate, restaurants, construction companies, that laundered money from less legal operations. The protection rackets, the gambling, the strategic violence against rivals who encroached on his territory. The political connections that kept law enforcement at bay, the international ties that made him powerful not just in New York, but across multiple countries. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you're agreeing to, he said. Your daughters will grow up with privilege, yes, but they'll also grow up knowing their protector is a criminal, that the money funding their education comes from illegal sources. Can you live with that? I thought about Antonio, who'd been a small-time criminal with delusions of grandeur, who'd hurt me because he was weak and needed someone weaker to dominate. Then I looked at Marco, who was honest about his darkness, but used his power to protect rather than destroy. I can live with it, I said, as long as you promise me one thing. What? That you'll never lie to them. When they're old enough to ask questions, you tell them the truth. Let them decide for themselves what they think of you. He considered this, then nodded. Agreed. Honesty always. We stayed like that until dawn, talking about futures and possibilities, building something new from the broken pieces of our pasts. When I finally crept back to my room, I found Sophia awake, sitting by the window. Mama, where were you? I sat beside her, pulling her onto my lap. Talking with Marco, about important things. Do you like him? The directness of the question startled me. Yes, baby, I do. Good. Emma and I like him too. He's nice to us, not like Papa was. My heart clenched. They remembered more than I'd hoped, understood more than I'd given them credit for. Marco will never hurt us, I said firmly. That's a promise. I know. He told us. She leaned against me sleepily. He said we're his family now, that he'll protect us forever. He'd talked to my daughters, made promises to them, bound us all together without my explicit permission. I should have been angry. Instead, I felt relief. We were safe. We were wanted. We were home. Even if that home was built on a foundation of violence and crime. 3 months passed in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. The mansion had truly become our home. The girls flourished in their new school, made friends whose parents had no idea they were living with one of New York's most dangerous criminals. I'd become proficient enough in self-defense that James grudgingly admitted I could hold my own in most situations. And Marco had become everything I never knew I needed. We kept our relationship relatively private, though the household staff certainly knew. The girls had accepted it with the easy adaptability of children, calling him Uncle Marco, in a way that made his expression soften every time. It should have been perfect. Almost was. Then came the phone call that changed everything. I was in the garden with the twins when Marco appeared, his face grim in a way I'd learned to recognize as serious trouble. Inside. Now. All of you. The girls obeyed immediately, sensing the urgency. I followed, my heart racing. In his study, he closed the door and turned to face me. Antonio escaped from Sing Sing. The words didn't make sense at first. That's impossible. He's in maximum security. Was in maximum security. 3 days ago during a prison transfer to a medical facility. 2 guards dead, 1 critically injured. He had help from the outside. My legs went weak. The Volkovs? No, different players. Smaller operation, but effective. We're trying to track them, but Antonio knows how to disappear. He learned from the best criminals. He'll come for the girls. It wasn't a question. Antonio might have been a terrible husband, but he'd always viewed Sophia and Emma as his property. Losing them would be unacceptable to his ego. I won't let him near them, Marco said, his voice hard with promise. I've already tripled security. Nobody gets within a mile of this property without us knowing. That's not enough. You said yourself that determined people can get through any defense. Then we make him less determined. Marco moved to his desk, pulling out a file. We have leverage. Antonio's partners in the original theft, the ones who weren't caught. We find them. We use them to draw him out. And then I eliminate the threat. Permanently. The casual discussion of murder should have horrified me. Instead, I felt only cold calculation. Antonio had beaten me, stolen from me, abandoned his children, and now he was coming to take them away from the first stable home they'd ever known. "I want to help," I said. "Lucia." "I'm serious. I know him better than anyone. I know how he thinks, how he operates. Let me help track him down." Marco studied me for a long moment. "You understand what you're asking? You'd be complicit in his death." "Good." Something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe, or recognition of just how much I'd changed from the terrified woman who'd answered the wrong door 3 months ago. "All right, but you follow my lead. No independent action. Understand?" "Understood." The next week was a blur of intelligence gathering and strategic planning. Marco's network was extensive, his information sources terrifyingly comprehensive. We tracked Antonio's movements through camera footage, informant reports, financial transactions. He was moving toward New York, coming home. "He'll try to get to the girls at school," I said, studying the map of his probable routes. "It's the most vulnerable point. The transition from the car to the building, or vice versa. We've already increased security there. 2 of my men in civilian clothes, rotating positions. The school thinks they're worried parents. It won't be enough. Antonio's smart when he's cornered. He'll find a gap." Marco's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression darkening. He just used a credit card at a gas station in New Jersey, 2 hours away. "Then we move now. Set the trap before he gets here." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. We let word leak that I'd been seen shopping in Manhattan, alone, at a specific boutique known for its discreet clientele. A place where a man could grab someone without immediate witnesses. "You're bait," James reminded me as we prepared. "The second he shows himself, we move. You don't engage, you don't fight back. You trust us to do our jobs." I nodded, checking the small panic button concealed in my watch. One press would bring Marco's entire team down on our location. The boutique was upscale, all white marble and soft lighting. I browsed the racks of designer clothes I'd never wear, hyper-aware of James and 2 other guards positioned strategically around the store. Marco was outside in one of the cars, monitoring through the security cameras he'd had installed the night before. An hour passed. Then 2. Maybe we'd been wrong. Maybe Antonio had changed his plans. Then I saw him, older than I remembered, thinner, with a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He browsed through the men's section, watching me through the mirrors and racks. My hand moved toward my watch, but I stopped. He was with someone, a woman, young and nervous-looking. She kept glancing at the exits, her body language screaming discomfort. Was she a hostage? An accomplice? Either way, engaging now might get her hurt. I moved toward a different section, drawing Antonio away from her. He followed, maintaining distance, waiting for his moment. It came when I headed toward the dressing rooms. He closed the distance quickly, his hand gripping my elbow with familiar, painful pressure. "Hello, Lucia." His voice triggered a visceral response. Fear? Yes, but also rage. This was the man who'd made me feel worthless for 6 years, who'd hit me while I was pregnant, who'd abandoned his children, who now wanted to reclaim them like misplaced possessions. "Antonio, you look terrible." His grip tightened. "We're leaving. Together. Quietly. If you make a scene, that woman over there, my insurance policy, dies. She's wearing explosives. One phone call from me, and this entire store goes up." I believed him. Antonio had always been capable of spectacular violence when cornered. "The girls?" I asked quietly, playing along. "Coming with us. We're going to be a family again, Lucia, just like old times. I'd rather die." His free hand moved to his pocket, pulling out a phone. "Then you'll die, and the girls will still come with me. Your choice." I pressed the panic button. Everything happened at once. The store's lights cut out. emergency lighting kicking in with an eerie red glow. James appeared from nowhere, his gun trained on Antonio. The woman screamed and bolted for the exit. Antonio yanked me in front of him, using me as a shield exactly as Marco had predicted. His phone was at his ear, finger hovering over a button. "Back off or I trigger it," he shouted. Marco's voice came from somewhere behind us, calm and controlled. "There is no trigger. Antonio, we switched her vest with a dummy 2 hours ago while you were watching Lucia. Your insurance policy is worthless." Antonio's grip faltered for just a second, long enough for me to execute the move James had drilled into me 100 times. I drove my elbow into his solar plexus, twisted out of his grip, and dropped to the floor. Gunshots, 3 of them, precisely aimed. Antonio collapsed, blood spreading across the white marble floor. I didn't look at him, didn't need to see the confirmation of what I knew had happened. Instead, I focused on Marco, who was suddenly there, pulling me to my feet, checking me for injuries with hands that shook slightly. "You're okay. You did perfectly. It's over." The woman, the supposed hostage, was being checked by one of Marco's men. The vest she'd been wearing was indeed fake, an elaborate stage prop that had looked real enough to fool Antonio. "He's not dead," James reported from where he knelt beside Antonio. "But close. Ambulance?" Marco looked at me. The question was clear. My choice. Save him or let him die. I thought about Sophia and Emma, sleeping safely in the mansion, about the home we'd built, the security we'd found, about the man at my side who'd risked everything to protect us. "Let him die," I said quietly. "He's already dead to us." Marco nodded to James, who stepped back. Within minutes, Antonio stopped breathing. The police would call it self-defense. Marco's lawyers would ensure the story was airtight. The woman would corroborate everything, coached by Marco's people to tell the right version of events, and life would go on. Back at the mansion, I went straight to the girls' room. They were awake, somehow sensing something had happened. Mrs. Benedetti sat with them, her presence reassuring. "Is the bad man gone?" Sophia asked as I gathered them both into my arms. "Yes, baby. He's gone. Forever." "Good," Emma said simply. "Can Uncle Marco read us a story?" He appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by her words. "Of course. Which story?" "The one about the princess who saved herself," Sophia decided. Marco settled into the chair beside their bed, the girls snuggling against him with easy affection. As he read, his voice steady and gentle, I watched from the doorway and understood what had happened. We'd become a family. Not through blood or marriage or any conventional means, but through shared trauma and mutual protection. Through choices made in darkness that led somehow to light. "Mama, come sit with us," Emma called. I joined them, fitting into the space beside Marco, the 4 of us tangled together like we'd always been this way. His free hand found mine, squeezing gently. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what?" "For giving them a childhood, for making us safe, for being the father they deserved." His eyes met mine, dark and honest. "Thank you for letting me, for seeing past what I am to what I could be." Later that night, after the girls were asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Marco found me in the library. I was staring at nothing, processing everything that had happened. "Regrets?" he asked, settling beside me. "No. Should I have them?" "Most people would. You just participated in letting your ex-husband die, and he stopped being my husband the first time he hit me. Today, I just made sure he couldn't hurt our daughters." "Our daughters." He repeated the words slowly, testing them. "You said our. They call you Uncle Marco, but we both know you're more than that. You've been more father to them in 3 months than Antonio was in 6 years." I turned to face him fully. Unless you don't want. He kissed me, cutting off the doubt. When he pulled back, his expression was fierce with emotion. I want all of it. You, them, this strange family we've built. I want to make it official. Official? He produced a small box from his pocket. Inside, a ring. Simple but elegant, a single diamond that caught the light. Marry me, Lucia. Let me be their father legally. Let me protect you all officially, not just in practice. The proposal should have terrified me, moving from one marriage into another so quickly, binding myself to a criminal, making my daughters part of his world permanently. Instead, I felt only certainty. Yes. The wedding was small, private, attended only by Marco's most trusted people and Mrs. Benedetti, who cried through the entire ceremony. The girls served as flower girls, delighted by their fancy dresses and the importance of their roles. We changed their last names to DeLuca through adoption papers that Marco's lawyers expedited. Sophia and Emma DeLuca, legally his daughters, legally protected by everything his name meant. And I became Lucia DeLuca, wife of the most dangerous man in New York, mother to his adopted daughters, living a life I never could have imagined. Sometimes, late at night, I wondered if I'd made the right choice, if binding my children to this world of violence and crime would ultimately destroy them. But then I'd watch Marco helping Emma with her homework, or teaching Sophia basic Italian, or simply being present in their lives with a consistency Antonio never managed. And I knew. We were safe. We were loved. We were home. And if that home was built on a foundation of darkness, well, we'd learn to find light in the shadows. 6 months after Antonio's death, a letter arrived from prison. Victor Volkov, writing to congratulate Marco on his marriage and express his pleasure that the matter had been resolved satisfactorily. Enclosed was a check for $2 million, the money Antonio had stolen, recovered from a hiding place Victor's people had finally discovered. Marco donated it all to a domestic violence shelter in my name. Blood money, he explained when I asked why. Your daughters will inherit legitimate wealth. This buys some redemption. It was a small gesture in the grand scheme of his crimes, but it meant something that he'd made it. We weren't a normal family. We never would be. But we were whole, protected, together. And in a world as broken as ours, that was more than most people ever found.